My parents threatened my life to steal my $3.08 trust, but I outsmarted them and took back everything they tried to destroy. The dining room doors were locked from the inside when the knife slid across the white tablecloth. The blade stopped inches from my chest. "Transfer the money, Marlowe," my mother Edith said quietly, her voice steady in a way that felt more frightening than shouting. "Or we find out how much your calm is worth." I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I watched my brother Calder hunched over my laptop, his fingers hovering above the keyboard, his pupils blown wide with desperation as he prepared to drain $3.08 million from an account he had never earned. Across the table, my father Leon clutched the edge like a lifeline, breathing fast, waiting to be rescued by money he believed belonged to him by birthright. They thought they were robbing me. They didn't know the key Calder was about to press wasn't connected to a bank. It was a silent panic trigger routed straight to state cybercrime. I lifted my glass and took a slow sip of wine. 3, 2, 1. But none of this began with a knife. 48 hours earlier, the most dangerous thing in my life was a cold cup of coffee. I stood alone in my downtown Boston apartment, quiet, owned outright, and deliberately ordinary. Sunlight spilled across the quartz counters I'd paid for myself. No inherited money. No favors. Just discipline. My phone buzzed. Leon. We hadn't spoken in 6 months. Not since I'd refused to co-sign a loan for Calder's failed, creative venture. My thumb hovered. I answered. "What do you want?" "Marlowe," he said warmly, too warmly. "Is that how you speak to your father?" "I'm working." "We've been worried about you," he continued. "Edith and I were talking about Grandma Evelyn. It's been a year since she passed. We thought, maybe it's time for a private remembrance. Just us." I leaned against the counter, listening the way I'd learned to listen to numbers, tone, timing, pressure. They didn't do remembrance. They did performance. "I have plans," I said. "Marlowe," he interrupted quickly. "Calder will be there. He's not well. He needs you. We all need closure." For a moment, an old instinct flared, the hope that maybe this time it was real. That maybe I was still more than a solution to their problems. Then Leon added, casually, "And bring that blue security fob of yours. The one for financial access. We found something of Evelyn's. Old instruments. Might need help liquidating." The trap closed. There were no instruments. I had audited Evelyn's estate down to the cent before she died. Everything sat in a charitable trust one controlled, legally sealed. They didn't want closure. They wanted the key. If I said no, they would escalate. They always did. Appear at my office. Call my contacts. Forge something. Push until resistance collapsed. The only way to end it was to let them believe they were about to win. "I'll come," I said evenly. "Friday." "Good," Leon exhaled, relief leaking through. "Don't be late." The call ended. I opened my laptop. At 32, I wasn't the compliant child they remembered. I was a forensic accountant. I dismantled financial lies for a living. I knew exactly how greed behaved when it believed it was safe. They wanted access. So I decided to give it to them. That night, I didn't build a bank portal. I built a mirror. The next morning, I sat across from Evan Pike, an asset protection attorney who didn't ask unnecessary questions. He studied my schematic, then looked up slowly. "This is aggressive." "A restraining order won't stop them," I replied. "Only consequences will. If they willingly authenticate and attempt an illegal transfer," he said carefully, "that responsibility is entirely theirs." Exactly. I left his office and worked without pause. No team. No music. Just precision. The interface was flawless, identical colors, identical prompts, identical reassurance. But every keystroke would be recorded. Every biometric scan captured. Every threat preserved. By midnight, the system was live. The trap was set. And they were already hungry. Friday night arrived with a damp, heavy air that clung to my skin. The streets of suburban Connecticut, lined with magnolias and pristine hedges, looked calm, deceptive in the way calm can be before a storm. My car rolled onto the long gravel drive of my parents' estate, the crunch under the tires echoing like a warning. The house, a sprawling neoclassical mansion, glowed warmly against the foggy night. Columns rose like sentinels, manicured hedges in perfect symmetry. But my eyes didn't see beauty. They saw weakness. The cracks in the stucco, the peeling paint, the windows fogged with years of neglect, all of it reflected the rot beneath. I grabbed my bag, checking once more for the laptop and the mirrored site I had built. Everything was ready. Every key, every mouse click, every simulated transfer would be captured. The law would take care of the rest. The front door opened before I could knock. Edith appeared, wearing an old silk gown, fragrance too strong, too practiced, a mask hiding what I knew was predatory intent. She smiled, but her eyes didn't soften. "You made it," she said, voice tight, controlled. "We've been waiting." No hug. No warmth. Just calculation. Inside, Calder paced the foyer, like a predator marking territory. His designer clothes were slightly too tight, the expensive fabric doing nothing to disguise the jitter of anticipation. He looked at me, eyes gleaming with the mix of triumph and fear that comes from someone sure they've won. "Hello," I said softly. "You look, well." He smirked. "You wore that?" He gestured to my dark suit, charcoal gray, tailored and unyielding. "It's a family dinner, not an audit." I didn't respond. My gaze swept over the room. Every detail mattered, Edith's rigid posture, Calder's impatient pacing, my father's slow movements behind them. I had been reading patterns like this my entire life, and now, I saw every second of their greed before it happened. We walked to the dining room. The table was set with Evelyn's china, bone porcelain with gold rims. But the roast chicken was dry. The asparagus wilted. A pitiful meal presented as grandeur. I placed my bag down deliberately, ensuring the laptop was within reach, each step measured. Leon, sat at the head, gray-skinned, eyes that had once held warmth now hollow, shaking slightly. He poured wine with a hand that quivered in anticipation. His words came out cold, mechanical. "Sit," he commanded. We ate in silence for 3 minutes. Fork scraping against plates, the air thick with unspoken threats. Finally, Leon dropped his fork, the clatter loud, deliberate. "Enough," he said. "We didn't bring you here to talk about Grandma." I leaned back, patting my mouth with the napkin. "The roast is dry." "So, what do you want?" Calder erupted. "The money. Now." Leon raised his hand, silencing him. His eyes were hard, dead. "Your sister is in trouble, Marlowe. Real trouble. And it's your problem now." I studied them both. "What kind of trouble?" "Debts," Leon whispered. "Private lenders. High interest. Collateral. Your sister's life is on the line." I looked at the clock on the wall, 8:15. Midnight deadline. $3. 8 million. And my parents assumed I would panic. "You're the trustee," Leon added. "You have access to Grandma's accounts. Use it." I let the words hang. Calm, deliberate. "Charity accounts. I can't redirect those." Leon's expression hardened. "Forget the bylaws. This is life or death. You will transfer the money." I watched them, not with fear, but with clarity. They were no longer family. They were predators. Their greed had evolved into action, a desperate, reckless hunger, and I was the only thing standing in their way. He stood slowly. The oak chair scraped the floor. Each step was an announcement of intent. The double doors to the foyer clicked shut. Deadbolt sliding home. His brass key vanished into his pocket. Then he returned, placing the knife gently on the table. Serrated edge catching the chandelier light. He didn't brandish it, the threat was quiet, precise. The air left the room. "Hostage." Edith's eyes gleamed. Calder smirked. Together, they were unity in corruption. I needed them to underestimate me. They needed to see fear. I let my lip tremble. I let my breath shake. Fake tears pricked. "Dad, please," I whispered. A pathetic, trembling facade. Edith leaned forward. "You hid the money before. You can hide this." Calder cackled. Pathetic victim routine. "Just open the laptop." I complied, slowly. Deliberate. Opened my bag. Pulled out the laptop. Their lean, desperate eyes on the screen. I typed the password, slow enough for them to memorize. The fake dashboard loaded, $3. 8 million staring back at them. Their breaths caught. Greed replaced restraint. "Transfer it," Leon commanded. "All of it." I hesitated. My hand shook. I can't. Calder hit enter. Manic with triumph. But the screen flashed red. A wail pierced the room, critical security alert. Unauthorized access detected. Biometric and GPS captured. Law enforcement dispatched. Panic rippled. Edith froze. Calder's eyes widened in disbelief. They had fallen into the trap. The siren's wail cut through the mansion like a blade, slicing the heavy tension into shards of panic. Edith's face went pale, her silk gown sticking to her clammy skin as she stumbled back from the table. Calder froze mid-laugh, the triumphant smirk draining from his face like paint washed away by a storm. Stop. This isn't real. Edith gasped, her voice cracking as her hands reached for the laptop, trying to shut the screen. It's just a glitch. I leaned back in my chair, cold and precise. My hand rested lightly on the keyboard. No, Edith. You pressed the transfer button yourself. Everything you've done has been captured. Calder's hands shook. You tricked us. This isn't the trust. He stammered, eyes darting to the windows, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Funny, isn't it? I said softly, almost conversational. You threatened me with a knife. You tried to steal from me. And now? You're trapped in your own greed. The mansion's quiet grandeur, the chandeliers and gold-rimmed china, suddenly felt like a cage. The shadows in the corners seemed to mock them. The sirens outside intensified, echoing against the walls, a rhythmic promise of justice arriving. From the foyer, heavy footsteps approached. The front door burst open. 2 uniformed state police officers stormed in, radios crackling, their presence authoritative and immediate. Step away from the computer, one of them commanded. Hands where we can see them. Edith and Calder froze, their carefully rehearsed scripts of control unraveling in the blink of an eye. They had expected resistance, but not a live wire of legal consequences waiting at the press of a key. Edith's voice faltered. This is outrageous. He can't, he won't. Ma'am, the officer interrupted, tone clipped. You've threatened her life. Attempted unauthorized transfer of funds. You're under arrest. Calder slumped into a chair, his face pale as if he'd aged decades in seconds. No, you can't. I'm her brother. I'm supposed to. This isn't fair. Fairness had nothing to do with it. Years of manipulation, entitlement, and calculated cruelty had brought them here. They had weaponized family loyalty against me, expecting submission. Now, the tables had turned. I stood, calm, precise. Every step deliberate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. The laptop mirrored their every move to law enforcement, the screen blinking like a scoreboard. Rosalind, Edith croaked, tears now sliding freely down her cheeks. You can't. It's our family. I smiled. Not a warm smile. Not one of reconciliation. But a smile born from justice. Family? Perhaps once. But family protects, not manipulates. Family doesn't threaten. You chose greed over love. Leon's legs wobbled. He leaned heavily on the table, his hands gripping the edge like a lifeline. All of this, it's not real. The money, you can't, you don't. Yes, I said, voice unwavering. I do. The officers moved forward, gently but firmly cuffing Edith and Calder. Each struggle was brief, they were weak in the absence of authority, their confidence shattered. The silk gown snagged on a chair leg. Calder's expensive shoes slipped slightly on the polished floor. It was a ballet of downfall, choreographed by their own hubris. I turned to the last figure still standing, Leon, patriarch of calculated cruelty, architect of every exploit. His face was ashen, eyes wide, lips pressed into a thin line. He had underestimated me, underestimated Rosalind who had once been a quiet, obedient child. You think you've won, he whispered, voice quivering. I did win, I replied, calm, precise. You thought you controlled me. You thought threats and performance grief could bend me. But I was never the obedient child you remembered. I was learning. Watching. Waiting. The officers guided Leon toward the foyer. He stumbled slightly, disbelief etched into every line of his face. I followed, ensuring every step was deliberate. Every moment I maintained control of the scene. As they were led out, Edith's voice wavered one last time. This isn't the end. I paused in the doorway, hands resting lightly on the doorframe, and said, softly, almost tenderly, "For you, it is. You taught me what loyalty isn't. You taught me how it can be twisted into a weapon. And now, you are facing the consequences of your choices." Outside, the driveway glimmered wet under the streetlights. Patrol cars lined the edges, blue and red reflections dancing across the manicured hedges. I watched as my family, my former family, was escorted into the vehicles. No screams. No pleas. Only the quiet understanding that their actions had finally caught up to them. I returned to the dining room. The knife remained on the table, untouched. The meal, forgotten. The grandeur, meaningless. I collected the laptop, closing it gently. My hands did not shake. My heart did not race. I walked through the house one last time. Each room whispered memories of manipulation, late nights where I had been blamed for things I didn't do, whispered threats disguised as advice, silences heavier than words. But none of it mattered now. Justice had arrived, precise and uncompromising. Sitting by the window, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The mansion was quiet now, empty of the ghosts of entitlement and cruelty. For the first time in decades, I felt free in their house, free in the space where fear had once ruled. Outside, the sirens faded into the distance. Inside, I sipped my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. I had done what I came to do. I had reclaimed not just money, but dignity, autonomy, and peace. And for the first time in years, I realized, escaping a family doesn't mean forgetting them. It means understanding their limits, and your own. The mansion felt impossibly large without their presence. Every echo of their footsteps was gone, every whispered demand and sly threat replaced by an eerie quiet. The chandeliers, once symbols of extravagance and control, hung like inert sentinels, observing a scene now cleansed of deceit. I walked slowly from the dining room to the study, each step a meditation on the justice I had orchestrated. Outside, the state police had begun cataloging evidence. Each laptop, every document, even the discarded silk gown and polished shoes were treated as exhibits. I had ensured the trap was airtight. From the mirror sight to the biometric capture, nothing was left to chance. My parents, Edith, and Calder had underestimated my patience and precision. I sank into the study chair, exhaling deeply. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the relief that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. But relief was not enough. Years of manipulation and exploitation could not vanish in a single night. They had weaponized family bonds against me. I needed closure, and it had to be complete. 2 days later, the first court summons arrived. It was for Calder, my father, and Edith. The charges were severe: attempted wire fraud, threats, unauthorized access, and conspiracy to coerce a trustee. It was a legal symphony, each note harmonizing perfectly with the evidence I had captured. My lawyer, Harrison, reviewed the filings with a rare smile of satisfaction. "You did everything by the book," he said, leaning back in his chair. "No wiggle room, no ambiguity. They'll have a hard time contesting this." I nodded, my fingers tracing the edge of the desk. "It's more than the law," I said quietly. "It's accountability. They've lived decades thinking entitlement could shield them from consequences." Harrison leaned forward. "They won't recover easily. Even if they try to appeal, the evidence is damning. And the trust funds? Completely secure." I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Grandma Margaret had entrusted me for a reason. I had spent years proving worthy, not through compliance or obedience, but through understanding, vigilance, and strategic patience. And now, the lesson was complete: power without accountability is meaningless, but knowledge and foresight can turn the tide. The first media reports trickled in. Headlines read: "Heir arrested in family trust heist, elite Connecticut family in turmoil, police recover millions in prevented theft." Even without naming me, it was clear who had orchestrated the outcome. Friends and colleagues reached out, some cautiously, others with excitement. Few had believed that I could confront them, let alone prevail. But I had, and now the world knew that calculated patience can be more powerful than brute force. In the aftermath, I returned to my apartment in Boston. The skyline gleamed with the first hints of dawn, the city indifferent to my triumphs and traumas alike. I poured myself a cup of coffee, strong and black, the aroma grounding me in the reality that I had survived, and that I had reclaimed my life. Legal proceedings dragged on, but with each day, my former family's defenses crumbled. Their arrogance had been their undoing. Calder, once boastful and smug, had become a shadow of himself in the courthouse. Edith's attempts to charm the judge faltered under the weight of irrefutable evidence. And my father, the man who had orchestrated years of manipulation, now faced not only criminal liability but the collapse of his carefully constructed public image. Even as I watched them struggle, a part of me felt a quiet sorrow. Not for them, they had chosen their path, but for what could have been. Family, if it had been rooted in respect and love, could have been a sanctuary. Instead, it had been a battlefield, and I had been forced to learn early the harsh lesson that affection without accountability is nothing more than leverage waiting to be exploited. Amidst the legal chaos, I began rebuilding. My work with federal audits and forensic accounting gave me structure, purpose, and the ability to channel my anger into precision. Small victories at the office, meticulous tracking of corporate accounts, and mentoring young analysts reminded me that justice and diligence could coexist. For the first time, I felt the balance of power in my hands without the constant dread of betrayal. There were moments, late at night, when memories crept in, the dry roast dinners, the whispered lies, the knife laid gently on the table as if it were a benign object. I closed my eyes and breathed, allowing myself to process. Fear had been replaced by clarity, manipulation replaced by observation. I understood the anatomy of greed, the psychology of control, and the fine line between loyalty and exploitation. I even allowed myself to think ahead. Future plans were no longer dictated by others' whims. I considered relocating, expanding my work, and exploring new ventures, not for status or wealth, but to ensure that I would never again be trapped in a web of expectation and entitlement. The lessons were harsh, but invaluable. And so, as the police cars faded into memory and court dates loomed, I understood something profound: survival is not enough. One must reclaim autonomy, assert boundaries, and exact accountability where manipulation once reigned. The storm had passed, but its aftermath was fertile ground for growth. The trust, once a target for greed, became a symbol, not of wealth, but of resilience, strategy, and self-respect. My former family had underestimated the quiet daughter who had always observed from the shadows. Now, the world had seen her rise. And I knew, deep down, that no amount of charm, manipulation, or familial expectation could ever trap me again. Weeks passed, and the courthouse became the stage for the slow, humiliating unraveling of the family I had once called my own. Calder, Edith, and Jessica appeared like ghosts of arrogance, their once imposing presence diminished by handcuffs and public scrutiny. Each hearing revealed another layer of deception, and the public's fascination with their downfall was palpable. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and the quiet authority I had cultivated in silence became a spectacle of accountability. The first hearing was brutal. The judge, a seasoned woman with eyes that missed nothing, listened as evidence of attempted wire fraud, coercion, and threats was presented. Each document I had mirrored, every keystroke captured on the fake banking site, was examined in painstaking detail. The look on Calder's face, once so composed, cracked as the weight of years of entitlement finally collided with reality. Edith's pleas for leniency were met with raised eyebrows. Jessica's manic insistence that she didn't know better fell flat against a timeline that proved her conscious, deliberate participation. Outside the courthouse, I walked alone for the first time in months. Boston's streets were alive, indifferent to my victories and my scars alike. I allowed myself a quiet smile. Justice wasn't a sudden, cinematic moment, it was painstaking, methodical, and undeniably satisfying in its completeness. Years of their manipulation and deceit had culminated in this reckoning, and it was mine to witness. Back at the apartment, I reviewed my finances. The trust fund, once the bait in their elaborate game, was now untouchable. Every dollar had been safeguarded, every account fortified. I had built layers of protection, both technological and legal, ensuring that nothing, no threat, no deceit, no familial coercion, could ever reach it again. For the first time, wealth meant freedom, not obligation. But money, I reminded myself, was secondary. The true victory was autonomy, the ability to walk away from the toxic ties that had bound me for decades. I made a small ritual of closing each correspondence from my former family, whether letters from lawyers or scathing notes from Jessica, and dropping them into a sealed box. I labeled it "Past" and placed it in the back of my closet. Out of sight, out of mind. The following weeks brought the sentencing. Calder was ordered to serve time for multiple counts of fraud and coercion. Edith faced probation for conspiracy, while Jessica, the puppet who had danced to every manipulation, was sentenced to community service and restitution payments she could barely meet. The estate, once a symbol of family power, was now in legal limbo, its gates chained and lawns overgrown. I had watched them chase greed and violence, and now I watched the tangible consequences of those choices unfold. Friends and colleagues reached out cautiously at first, unsure if they could congratulate or sympathize. Over coffee and phone calls, I realized how much the world had underestimated me. For years, I had been the silent observer, the doormat, the obedient daughter. Now, I was Rosalind Malouf, strategist, survivor, and executor of justice. People began to see me not as the girl who could be bullied by family, but as the woman who could dismantle them with precision and foresight. I also started to rebuild personal boundaries. Relationships that had been strained or hollow, including those with distant friends and professional mentors, were approached with a new clarity. Trust, I realized, was not a given. It had to be earned, reciprocated, and respected. No more unquestioned loyalty, no more blind obedience. Only the kind of alliances built on honesty and mutual respect were worth keeping. In the evenings, I returned to the quiet rituals I had developed before the storm: journaling, long walks, and meticulous attention to my work. For the first time in decades, I felt fully in control of my own time. I even began to explore hobbies I had abandoned, painting and running, activities that reminded me that life existed outside spreadsheets, ledgers, and legal documents. There were moments, late at night, when memories of that dinner with the knife surfaced. I would sit in my small apartment, city lights flickering through the window, and remember the fear I had turned into clarity. Every glance, every manipulation, every threat had been logged in my mind, analyzed, and converted into strategy. The same skills that once ensured the survival of a billion-dollar family trust were now tools for my own independence. And yet, a subtle sense of mourning remained. Not for the wealth lost or the status denied, but for what could have been: a family that loved without strings, that celebrated each other without envy, that built memories without coercion. That world had never existed, and I had no illusions that it ever would. Instead, I learned that love without respect is exploitation, and loyalty without accountability is weakness. I spent my mornings at my office, now a sunlit suite in a modest building, working on audits and investigations. The past, once a cage, was now a library of lessons. Every case I reviewed reminded me that greed, when unchecked, destroys not only relationships but entire legacies. And every day, I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that I had dismantled my family's empire not through anger or impulse, but through patience, intellect, and moral clarity. By the time winter came, the snow blanketed the city in silence, mirroring the peace I had built internally. I could hear the occasional distant siren, a reminder that justice, though slow, always moves toward those who respect it. I allowed myself small joys: a warm cup of tea, a quiet walk along the harbor, the freedom to plan the future without fear. For the first time in decades, the world was mine to navigate on my terms. It was not revenge that sustained me, nor was it the collapse of the people who had harmed me. It was the quiet reclamation of agency, the deliberate decision to refuse exploitation, and the meticulous construction of a life rooted in self-respect. The mansion would remain theirs in memory only. My reality was built on freedom, clarity, and the knowledge that the past could no longer dictate my future. And so, the trap that had once saved me became a symbol, a testament to vigilance, to patience, and to the understanding that survival is only the beginning. True victory is living deliberately, unbound by manipulation, and reclaiming one's life from those who would distort it for their gain. The months following the sentencing were strangely serene. Boston's streets no longer carried the weight of surveillance, phone calls, or veiled threats. The house, once the battleground of greed and fear, sat quiet and empty, its gates chained, its grand lawn overgrown, a monument to the ruin that unchecked entitlement could bring. I walked past it occasionally, notebook in hand, analyzing architecture, finances, and psychology, as if even abandoned properties held lessons for a meticulous mind. I settled into routines that nurtured stability. Mornings were spent at my modest office, overseeing audits and small-scale investigations. Unlike my past work for the family trust, this was intentional, deliberate, work with purpose and autonomy. I reveled in the small victories, discovering hidden embezzlement in small businesses, helping victims recover funds, ensuring justice was served where greed had once flourished. The city, vibrant and indifferent, became my companion rather than a battleground. Personal life, once entangled with manipulation and betrayal, began to heal. I reconnected with friends who had doubted my resilience, my career, or my sanity. Slowly, I learned to accept kindness without suspicion, to let support exist without strings attached. Even casual conversations, once tinged with caution, now carried warmth and authenticity. I found joy in the mundane: cooking a meal for myself, walking the harbor at dusk, reading books that were not legal references or financial reports. Sometimes, I thought of Calder, Edith, and Jessica. They existed in a parallel world, one I no longer inhabited. The courthouse had delivered legal consequences: Calder's time in prison, Edith's probation, Jessica's restitution and community service. But beyond that, life itself was the ultimate punishment. Their choices had stripped them of family, dignity, and respect. The irony was not lost on me. They had spent decades trying to control me, and now they were powerless. I allowed myself a quiet satisfaction. The anniversary of the infamous dinner arrived. I marked it not with bitterness, but with reflection. It was a reminder of the pivotal moment that shifted my trajectory, the night when fear became strategy, when survival became empowerment. I poured a glass of wine, not in commemoration of cruelty, but in honor of my own resolve. That evening, I drafted letters, finalized personal finances, and organized archives of all evidence from my family's wrongdoing. Each document, carefully labeled and stored, was a testament to clarity, foresight, and justice, a permanent record that no manipulation could erase. The estate, though no longer under my direct management, became a distant memory. I had legal ownership of some properties, yet I chose simplicity over grandeur. My apartment, sunlit and quiet, represented freedom. No alarms, no locked doors, no looming threats, just space to think, breathe, and create. I even began small projects, mentoring young auditors, advising nonprofits on asset protection, occasionally speaking publicly about corporate accountability and the importance of foresight in personal and professional life. Emotionally, the process of disentangling from my family left scars, but it also brought clarity. I realized that love and loyalty must coexist with respect and integrity. Anything less is exploitation. By asserting boundaries, taking calculated risks, and demanding accountability, I had preserved not only my safety but my dignity. This lesson, hard-earned, became the foundation of my new existence. One afternoon, as I walked along the harbor, I noticed a young woman struggling with paperwork on a bench. Her situation mirrored, in microcosm, the manipulations I had endured. I approached her, offering guidance. She looked up, skeptical but hopeful. As we talked, I saw in her eyes the spark of determination, a reminder that survival and growth often begin with courage and clarity. I realized then that my story, once a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal, could also be a roadmap for empowerment. Life continued, measured and deliberate. I traveled sparingly, focusing on experiences rather than appearances. I cultivated meaningful connections rather than superficial ties. For the first time, I could plan my future without looking over my shoulder. The fear that once governed my decisions had been replaced with confidence, foresight, and an unshakable sense of agency. Sometimes, when night fell and the city lights shimmered on the water, I would allow myself to reflect on what had been lost, and what had been gained. I mourned the family that could have been, but I celebrated the life I had reclaimed. Every threat averted, every trap carefully laid, every legal and strategic decision had been a step toward liberation. And in that liberation, I found peace. Years later, I often returned to the quiet rituals that had sustained me, journaling, walking, observing, planning. My life had transformed from a story of coercion and fear into one of autonomy, strategy, and clarity. I had survived the predators masquerading as family, navigated a labyrinth of betrayal, and emerged intact, empowered, and in control. Ultimately, the lesson was simple: power, wealth, and influence are meaningless without integrity. Family, when toxic, must be navigated with caution. And loyalty, when weaponized, can only be repaid with foresight, patience, and unwavering commitment to oneself. I had chosen life, clarity, and independence over manipulation, fear, and obligation, and in doing so, I had finally won. Rosalind Maloff's story, once defined by fear, betrayal, and coercion, ended not with vengeance but with justice and self-determination. And in that ending, I discovered a profound truth: survival is not enough. The ultimate victory is reclaiming the right to live fully, deliberately, and freely. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.